Should you pay $2,000 more for the Canon R5 Mark II over the Canon R6 Mark II? Both of these cameras are amazing for hybrid shooters, providing amazing image quality in both photo and video. But are there enough upgrades on the R5 Mark II that make it worth buying? That's what we'll find out today. I tested these cameras head to head on all different features to see why you might choose one over the other. All these tests will be timestamped for your convenience. And at the very end, I'll share my verdict on who would benefit from the Canon R5 Mark II the most. Hi, my name is Bruno Pozo. I'm a full-time commercial here in Bend, Oregon, and I make weekly videos on filmmaking gear, technique, and how to make money with your camera. If that interests you, hit that like and subscribe. Now, onto the comparison. To make this a little fun, I'll be giving a point to whichever camera wins the head-to-head test. And at the end, we'll see which camera has the most points. Let's start with the biggest difference, their price. The Canon R5 Mark II is the third most expensive hybrid camera Canon offers, right behind the R1 and the R3. For the body alone, it costs $4,300. The Canon R6 Mark II, however, is much more affordable at $2,200. The $2,100 price difference is huge, and it can mean the difference between buying an L-series lens or not, which is something you definitely want to consider since a high-quality lens matters a lot more than the camera body. That's why I'll be giving a point to the Canon R6 Mark II for price. These cameras are both full-frame cameras, but they have different sensor technology and megapixels. The R6 Mark II has a 24.2 megapixel CMOS sensor, while the R5 Mark II has a stacked, back-illuminated 45 megapixel CMOS sensor. This sensor gives the R5 Mark II a much faster readout speed, reducing its rolling shutter. This is also why the Canon R5 Mark II has incredible continuous shooting speed, especially when using the electronic shutter. But more on that later. The R6 Mark II sensor is still great and you're not going to be disappointed by it, but the point is still going to the Canon R5 Mark II. As a video first shooter, I am always curious about the recording of formats available to these cameras. On the Canon R6 Mark II, you can shoot 6K, oversampled, uncropped 4K video up to 60 frames per second. In 1080p video, you go up to 180 frames per second, and you get C-Log 3 for 10-bit video with up to 13 stops of dynamic range. Paired with the oversampled 4K video, this camera captures stunning 4K video with great detail and colors. And I think the R6 II has some of the sharpest and cleanest 4K 60 in the hybrid camera marketplace at this price point. You technically can shoot in 6K RAW with the R6 Mark II, but it requires an external recorder like the Atomos Ninja, which just adds to the cost and size of the setup. The Canon R5 Mark II can shoot 12-bit 8K RAW video internally up to 60 frames per second. It can also do 12-bit 4K SRAW up to 60 frames per second. And in the standard formats, 4K can go up to 120 frames per second. And in 1080 and 2K video, you can go up to 240 frames per second. You also finally get access to C-Log 2, providing up to 16 stops of dynamic range. You also are able to record 10-bit video without needing to shoot in a log profile. The R5 II also allows for DCI aspect ratio, which can be great for those looking for a wider cinematic view. All this creates for amazing video performance on the Canon R5 Mark II on paper, but as we'll see, these come with some drawbacks. However, the R5 Mark II's extensive recording options make it the better camera, so it gets the point. But that is just the video recording options. How good is the actual video quality? The biggest issue with the Canon R5 Mark II currently is that the 4K video is only oversampled in 24, 25, and 30 frames per second. so your 4K 60 and 4K 120 are not quite as sharp. The fact that the Canon R5 Mark II's 4K 60 is not oversampled, but the Canon R6 Mark II's 4K 60 is oversampled is just baffling. I really don't see why Canon couldn't provide an oversampled 4K 60 option on the R5 II, and it's really disappointing. But in 24 and 30 frames per second, the R5 II's 4K video is really good, especially when you have C-Log 2 enabled for the most dynamic range. The R6 II's C-Log 3 still gets you amazing dynamic range and bit depth. But once you switch over to 1080p on the R6 II, it starts to look a little mushy and soft because it isn't actually oversampled from the 6K sensor. The R5 Mark II can be oversampled in 1080p as well as 2K, all the way up to 60 frames per second. So you can get pretty amazing 1080p video out of this camera as well. But the biggest update the R5 Mark II has is the ability to record RAW internally. The 12-bit RAW video in 8K is absolutely stunning, and if you want to even save a little bit of space, you can use Canon's new S-RAW, which records the RAW video in a 4K resolution. You still get the 12-bit color and amazing video quality, but of course you're saving a lot more space in storage. The RAW video requires more computer processing and know-how to fully take advantage of, but it can create amazing images if you can handle it. But if sharp 4K 60 is important to your work, then I definitely would look at skipping the R5 Mark II. Despite this, the point is still going to the R5 Mark II for its other amazing video capabilities and dynamic range. Video performance is vastly different on these cameras, but what about their photo quality? The R6 II's 24 megapixel sensor produces 6,000 by 4,000 images, effectively a 6K image. The detail is incredibly sharp, and the colors are exactly what you expect from Canon. The 6K resolution allows you to crop in a decent amount without losing quality, especially if you're going to be posting these images on any sort of web or social media platform. So you will not be disappointed by the image quality of this camera. The R5 II's 45 megapixel sensor produces 8,192 by 5,464 pixel images. So an 8K image. Now, of course, with 8K, you can crop in a lot without losing detail. And the quality is absolutely breathtaking and makes for a great wildlife camera where you may want to crop in 2, sometimes 3 times. However, the file sizes tend to be 2 to 3 times larger than the R6 Mark II's file sizes. So you will need to accommodate the R5 II with more storage space. But in terms of image quality, both are absolutely amazing. And the point is still going to go to the R5 II for its 8K image. With the new sensor on the R5 II, how is the rolling shutter? Well, based on CineD's test, the R5 Mark II has a rolling shutter of 17.3 milliseconds in 8K RAW at 25 frames per second. You get the same result when you're shooting in 4K fine mode, which is oversampling from 8K. But if you shoot in the non-oversampled mode, you get a faster readout at 9.7 milliseconds in 4K 25. It is shocking to see a rather high rolling shutter in 4K oversampled, since this is the mode I would use 90% of the time, but it seems like the 8K sensor is coming to bite the R5 Mark II when it comes to rolling shutter in video. But how about the Canon R6 Mark II? In 4K 24, the rolling shutter is a little bit better at 16.9 milliseconds, but it improves when you switch over to 4K 60 with a reading of 15.2 milliseconds. Not a huge difference in the oversampled rolling shutter performance between these cameras, but the R5 Mark II does have a better rolling shutter performance when it's not oversampled. But since I don't really recommend that for anyone, I'm going to give the point to the R6 Mark II. One of the greatest additions to cameras has been image stabilization, especially in-body image stabilization. This allows for a much smoother handheld video and even photos, no matter what lens you're using. And of course, if you can pair the camera's IBIS with its lens's optical stabilization, then you still get the absolute best possible performance. So how do these cameras perform? Well, exactly the same. They both have the same 5-axis in-body image stabilization that, when paired with a certain RF lenses, can give up to 8 stops of shake correction. The only issue is they also both suffer from the IBIS wobble at wider focal lengths. I've personally noticed it becomes an issue starting around 28mm and below. And these cameras don't allow you to actually turn off IBIS separately without turning off the lens stabilization as well. So you either have to choose between a wobble or no image stabilization, which is annoying. But at those further telephoto reaches, like 35mm and above, the IBIS is actually really good on both of these cameras. I'm really impressed by how well these cameras can be shot handheld at like 105mm very smoothly. In any case, in this test, this is going to be a tie. So let's move on to how these cameras perform in low light. The R6 Mark II's lower resolution sensor, in theory, should help with its low light performance, at least according to Canon. And its internal noise reduction does produce a very clean image, even at those very high ISOs, like 6400 and above. A funny feature of this camera's sensor is that it cleans up whenever you double its ISO. So its cleanest ISOs are 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, and 12800. And this is true whether you shoot in standard or in log. The Canon R5 Mark II also performs pretty well in low light. Its internal noise reduction is much more customizable when you shoot in the log profile, but in standard it has the exact same settings as the Canon R6 Mark II. However, the ISO trick doesn't work the same on the Canon R5 Mark II. Instead, the R5 Mark II has the cleanest ISO in C-Log2 at 800 and 4000 ISO. After that, it stops receiving any real cleanup. And I definitely feel like the high ISO levels are pretty noisy on the R5 II, at least when I compare them to the R6 Mark II. Because of that, I actually think the R6 Mark II tends to provide much cleaner images in low light. So the point is going to go to the R6 Mark II. We've sort of covered dynamic range when we spoke about the log profiles of these cameras. And just to recap, the R6 II gets roughly 13 stops of dynamic range in C-Log3, while the R5 II gets 16 stops of dynamic range in C-Log2. But how far can we push these profiles while still being able to recover them? For the R5 Mark II, you're able to recover up to 3 stops over and 2 stops under. Any more than that and the image starts to fall apart, while the R6 II is only good up to 2 stops over and 2 stops under. And in fact, recovering from underexposure produces a much nastier image on the R6 II than it does on the R5 II. So on this test, the point is going to the Canon R5 Mark II. Reliability is one of the most important factors to consider when buying a camera. And as we know, Canon has had some issues when it comes to their mirrorless cameras and overheating. But these are both Mark IIs of their bodies, so let's see what improvements they've made. The R6 II definitely performs much better than its predecessor. In my 69° Fahrenheit room, I was able to record 4K 60 for just around 49 minutes continuously before it overheated, while in 4K 24, I got up to an hour and 30 minutes before the battery died on me. This aligns pretty accurately with my personal experience because I have yet to have the R6 II overheat on me. And I've shot in all different conditions, both indoors, outdoors, in hot and in cold environments. But what about the R5 Mark II? In 4K 30 oversampled, it lasted 47 minutes in the exact same room. And in its line skipped 4K 60, it only lasted just over an hour. Unfortunately, the R5 II struggles with overheating. And in my real world use of this camera, it has overheated on me a few times. In fact, just this past week, I was shooting a band set outside on a hot summer day. It was roughly like 90° Fahrenheit outside. And I even had to set the fan onto high using the cooling fan grip. But even in that condition, it still only lasted 50 minutes before I ended up having to switch to the Canon R6 Mark II to actually finish the recording. Even in indoor use, if I record for long periods of time with the fan set on medium to help minimize noise in my scene, I can get the overheat warning pretty often on the R5 Mark II. It's unfortunate because I would prefer to use the camera without the fan grip because it ends up adding so much size and weight to the setup. But I can't reliably do so where I live, at least during the hot months of the year. But that's not true at all for the R6 II. For any time of the year, I can use it and it'll just give me a warning, but it has never really actually overheated and turned off on me. So the point is going to the R6 Mark II for overheating and reliability. Let's talk about these cameras' high burst mode. Both of these cameras perform very well if you need to capture fast action. The R6 II can shoot 12 frames per second using its mechanical shutter and 40 frames per second with its electronic shutter. However, when you use the electronic shutter, the photos will only be in 12-bit instead of its usual 14-bit. On the R5 II, you also get 12 frames per second with its mechanical shutter and 40 frames per second with its electronic shutter. But unlike the R6 II, you can still have your 14-bit photos when using the electronic shutter. So the point is going to the Canon R5 Mark II. Now, shutter speed is often overlooked because it's kind of a boring stat. But because I do like having fast lenses like the RF50 f1.2, having a fast enough shutter to use that f1.2 in daylight is important to me. So let's start with the R6 II. The R6 II has a top shutter speed of 1/16,000th of a second when using the electronic shutter, and in its mechanical shutter, you get a top speed of 1/8,000. The R5 Mark II has a much faster electronic shutter at 1/64,000th of a second. That's 2 extra stops of light you can cut, but it has the exact same mechanical shutter speed of 1/8,000th of a second. On top of that, the R5 II gets those 14-bit photos still with its electronic shutter. Because of this, it's going to be an easy point for the R5 Mark II. But what about their autofocus performance? Canon has been the leader in the camera industry for a pretty long time when it came to its autofocus performance. But is there even a noticeable difference between these cameras? The R6 II uses the dual pixel AF system that has given me no issues whatsoever in the last 2 years of using it. It's fast, reliable, sticky, especially when you're using the subject detection mode. The R5 II uses a new dual pixel intelligent AF. This is specifically handy for tracking subjects even when they become partially obscured, like say through a fence or some bushes. They both have subject detection, and with the R5 II you get a few extra features like action priority, people priority registration, and even advanced eye control AF. Now, in practice, I haven't noticed a difference between their autofocus performance, but the point's still gonna go to the R5 II for all of its advanced AF features. With such a huge price difference between the cameras, is there any difference in their build quality? Surprisingly, not really. They both have an aluminum alloy chassis that feels rugged and durable. They have a textured grip for your hand on both of the bodies that's really nice. And you can upgrade both of them with a battery grip, which I ended up doing for the R5 II to actually help with its overheating. The only real difference is the mode button and top screen on the R5 II. The R6 II instead just has the mode dial and the on and off switch there. But that's not really a big deal breaker or anything like that. So this one is going to be a tie. Related to build quality is ergonomics. How do these feel to hold as well as to operate with all their buttons and dials? They roughly are the same size and weight, but more on that later. So there isn't really a huge difference when you're actually handling them. They have the same photo video switch on the left side, all the same back buttons and even dials. And the only real difference is that the R5 II has a tally lamp on the front end corner, and you can adjust the brightness setting of its top screen with this extra button on top. But since no camera here really has an advantage, this one's going to be a tie. On that note, what is the difference when it comes to their size and weight? Well, the R6 II and R5 II weigh exactly the same at 1.3 pounds or 588 grams. Based on their design and build quality, that's kind of expected. And so you won't have an issue with the size and weight between these cameras. It's not like one's going to be much heavier and annoying to hold throughout the day. Unless, of course, you do decide to get the battery grip like I did for the R5 II, in which case it's going to be a lot bulkier and heavier. But without that, they're pretty much identical, so it's a tie. Now let's cover the differences between their viewfinder. Especially for photographers, this is important since this is how you're probably going to be using the camera most of the time. The R6 II has a 1/2-inch OLED screen with 3.69 million dots. In practice, the viewfinder is responsive, looks nice and crisp, and has worked great. I have never had any issues with it on my R6 II. On the R5 II, you get the same 1/2-inch OLED screen, but with 5.76 million dots. In practice, sure, I think the viewfinder is possibly a little bit sharper and clearer on the R5 Mark II, but it's not like some insane difference. But you do have the option for a blackout-free viewfinder in the R5 II, which is unavailable in the R6 II. Although it's a small difference, I think I'm still going to give the point to the R5 II just for this reason alone. But what about the LCD screen of these cameras? Having a nice LCD screen makes video capture more enjoyable and can even help when trying to capture those like high or low angles without completely breaking your neck. The R5 II has a 3-inch display with 2.1 million dots and has anti-smudge coating. The R6 II has the exact same 3-inch display with anti-smudge coating, but only has 1.62 million dots. Both of their screens are articulating so you can't get those high and low angles or even a selfie mode for vlogging. The screens are both really responsive to tapping to focus and have worked great and consistently in my experience. And to be honest, the difference between them isn't really that noticeable. But because the R5 II technically has more resolution, I'll give it the point. An important factor about cameras that often gets overlooked is their memory card slots. Ideally, I am looking for a camera that has at least 2 slots. That way I can have redundant recording in case anything happens to one of them. Luckily, both of these cameras have that dual slot. The real difference between them is the type of cards they accept. The R6 II has dual UHS 2 SD card slots, and the R5 II has one CF Express Type B card slot and one UHS 2 SD card slot. Personally, I prefer the CF Express cards because of how fast they can read and write. This usually means you can also record higher quality videos and take longer bursts of photos without having to wait for a long buffer. And CF Express cards have become much more affordable over the years, especially when you consider their speed and capacity. So that's why I have this 1 terabyte CF Express Type B card from Lexar Pro. It can record in 8K and it only cost me $250. If you try to get something similar with a V90 SD card, you're gonna spend upwards of like $800. But this is all subjective and unique to your needs. But in my case, I believe the R5 II has the better option, so it's gonna get the point. Another area where there is a lot of overlap is in their ports. But the Canon R5 Mark II does have an upgrade that we've been waiting for a very, very long time. So both of these cameras have an electronic hot shoe, a 3.5mm microphone port, a headphone port, a USB-C port, and the remote shutter. But while the R6 II has this micro HDMI port, the R5 II finally has a full-size HDMI port. I've always really despised how the R6 II had that micro HDMI port. Not only is it an annoying cable to have, it's flimsy and prone to breaking or even disconnecting. Having that full HDMI port on the R5 II is so convenient since You probably already have some HDMI cables lying around that you can use, and honestly, a lot of the monitors out there come with HDMI cables, and usually it's in that full size. This isn't quite as important if you don't use an external monitor often, like say a photographer wouldn't, but as a filmmaker, I love using my external monitor. But in any case, this is an objectively good upgrade, so the point is going to the R5 Mark II. When it comes to audio, the difference between these cameras is pretty small. The R6 II can record 2-channel 16-bit LPCM audio. The R5 II can record 4-channel 24-bit LPCM. So you can technically use an external mic and the internal mic simultaneously on the R5 II. I don't really care too much about that, but I do appreciate having that 24-bit audio. In practical terms, it allows for roughly 48 decibels more of dynamic range. So that can help prevent audio from clipping in your videos. I'll still use the 32-bit float audio recorded on my Rode Wireless Pros in post-production, but having that high-quality audio file as a backup internally is still really nice. So the point is going to the Canon R5 Mark II. Now, no camera is any good if it has terrible battery life. That was actually one of the reasons why I resisted getting the R5C, because I heard so many horror stories about how bad that battery was. Luckily, this isn't an issue at all with the R6 II. The R6 II uses those regular LP E6 and H batteries, which cost around $80. I normally carried about 3 extra ones for a full day shoot, and that would be more than enough for me. It wasn't ideal, but that's to be expected for those longer shoots like I did for my conference clients where I'm getting like hour-long presentations. The R5 II uses this new LPE6P battery, and the LPE6P just has a higher, I think, maximum continuous like amperage, something like that, which you actually need to take full advantage of all the video features on the R5 II. They do cost the exact same as the LPE6 and H batteries, but I wouldn't recommend actually getting or even using those E6 and H batteries on the R5 II because you're gonna lose functionality. It was kind of sad to come to that realization because I had all those extra LPE6 and H batteries from the R6 II that unfortunately are not going to be useful for the R5 II at all. And because I ended up getting that battery grip that took 2 batteries, I thought getting 3 extra spares was nice because then I have 2 in the camera and then 2 in the charger ready to go. But in terms of battery life performance between these cameras, there really wasn't a difference I could find even in those overheating tests. So it's going to be a tie. Whew! So what is my final verdict? Let's start off with what the points are. The R5 II clearly wins with 18 points, while the R6 II only got 9 points. But that doesn't tell the full story, because as we mentioned, the R5 II has really disappointing 4K 60, and if that's going to be something that's important to you and your work, then you'll definitely want to skip the R5 Mark II. Same with overheating. As much as I love the R5 Mark II and all the things it's capable of, I despise how sensitive it can be to overheating. I had to buy that $400 cooling fan grip just to make it a little more reliable, but now I have this really large, bulky, and kind of heavy camera setup. But even with that cooling fan grip, I cannot reliably use this camera on like a hot summer day, like for a wedding or for an outdoor event, especially if I decide to shoot anything above 30 frames per second, because that's when the camera even gives you a warning that, hey, it might overheat. And this has never been an issue with my R6 Mark II. I've used the R6 II on hot summer days without overheating it at all. And sure, I'll get the warning to show up, but it's never gone to the very end, and it actually has never turned off on me during a shoot. And I didn't even have to buy an external fan to actually get that privilege. So considering the R6 II is $2,000 cheaper, that's a great advantage to it. But what do I recommend? I think for serious hybrid shooters, you're probably better off with the R6 II. It does have some quirky limitations like that micro HDMI port and the fact that you go to 12-bit photos when you shoot with the electronic shutter, but it has been the most reliable camera I've used, and it does amazing video with its oversampled 4K image. And the photos are more than enough for professional work. At least I've never had any complaints from my clients. Plus, with the $2,000 you're gonna save buying the R6 II over the R5 II, you can buy a really nice L series lens, which is gonna help bump up your photo and video quality more than buying the R5 II and then using a normal kit lens on that. The R5 II is a great camera, don't get me wrong, but because it lacks that great 4K 60 and is a little more sensitive when it comes to overheating, I can't confidently recommend it for most people. Of course, it still has that amazing image quality both in photo and in video performance, and having that internal RAW video is really nice. I would recommend it for mainly photographers since it works amazing in that setting. But for dedicated video work, especially long form, it's not as reliable. I think in a studio environment, the R5 II would make a great video camera since you won't really suffer from those overheating issues if you're in a more controlled environment like that. But even in that setting, shooting for long periods of time is a little risky. Unless you get the fan, which is only noisy when you set it to high, but if you set it to medium, it'll provide enough cooling while still not really introducing that much noise into your scene. All in all, the R5 II is still a fantastic hybrid camera, and if you're just gonna shoot short video clips, then I think it still can be worth it. But what do you think? Would you pay the extra $2,000 more for the Canon R5 Mark II, or would you save that for the R6 II? Let me know down below. If you like this comparison video, you can check out my other comparison video of the R5 II and the R1 here. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the very end. I appreciate every single one of you who do, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.